CONQUEST fans, Robin here, here today with my forthcoming deck for our game of Fire Slayers versus the Aurochs. You guys voted for our first game from the new warbands to be Aurochs against Fire Slayers and Skaven against Sepulchral Guard. So I'm here with the Fire Slayers deck, and peculiarly I will also be running through the Aurochs deck because that's my deck that Pete's going to use. That's my Grand Clash deck. So I wanted to try it out again, but anyway, this video is about the Fire Slayers, and then the Aurochs will follow along probably the day after tomorrow. So here we go. So I'm going to start with some objectives, some new cards. I've gone for Ferocious Charge, which is a repeat of one of the Auroch cards, I think. Score this immediately if a friendly fighter takes an enemy fighter out of action with the charge action. If you can get your Fire Slayers inspired, then they are pretty lethal in combat, so that's why that one's in there. Ferocious Charge, and to score this immediately, and another score this immediately after that, the SCION of Grimnir. Score this immediately if your leader takes an enemy fighter out of action. So they're the Gerzag repeated card, which I have in my Auroch deck. Is there for Grimnir, so he's very tasty when he's inspired, so well worth having in, I think. Unstoppable Advance is another Fire Slayer specific card. Score this in an end phase if all your surviving fighters are in enemy territory. Now I rather like this card. It's basically Conquest, but you can score it in any phase, so at the end of any phase. So it's worth having if you're going for that Conquest type double up. The problem with scoring it is, of course, that the Fire Slayers are quite slow. Acclaim Retaken. Score this in an end phase if a friendly fighter holds an objective that an enemy fighter held at the beginning of the preceding action phase. So this is you've got to try and retake a objective, but I think again I think it's worth pushing in for the Fire Slayers deck. We have Conquest. Score this in the third end phase if all your surviving fighters are in your opponent's territory. So I put this in because that's my idea of the deck, is to push into the opponent's territory and stay there. And then Escalation is a new card, and this is I think one of the best new cards to have in the deck. Score this in an end phase if 3 or more upgrades were played in the preceding action phase. So it doesn't have to be you. So between the two players, you have to make 3 or more upgrade cards. That almost happens in every game, I think. So I think Escalation is worth putting in your deck, and that's why it's in mine. Divide and Conquer, because I'm going to be trying to get into my opponent's territory, but because the Fire Slayers are slow, some of them are like to get left behind, so I've put Divide and Conquer in the deck to try and mop up some extra glory on the way to achieving what I want to achieve. Supremacy. Score this in an end phase if you hold 3 or more objectives. I've stuck this in here because obviously with the way that the Dwarven inspire, with having to build objectives, then Supremacy is quite a possibility to score. Ploymaster. Score this in end phase if you've played 3 or more ploys in the preceding action phase. You play that one a lot, hoping to get ploys out. Swift Advance, again, it's good, goes well with Conquest and the new Fire Slayer equivalent of Conquest. Planter Standard. Score this in an end phase if your leader is holding an enemy objective in area territory. Again, Fire Slayers, enemy territory, objectives, seems like a likely one to try and have. But he's only the leader, of course. That's 11. Now, my 12th card, I actually had Hoarders in, which I misread at first, and I quickly swapped out for a different card. So Hoarders is score this in an end phase if all your fighters and no enemy fighters are holding objectives. So I read it as if only your fighters are holding it, which I thought was possible with non-objective based decks. There's a fairly good chance that you might be on an objective and they wouldn't. Especially towards the end of a game, but then I realised it was all your fighters, which is much harder, so I actually switched that out again right at the end for the nearest thing that I found that might be useful, and that's Master of War, which I think is a pretty nice card, Master of War. Score this in an end phase if you scored an objective card, played a ploy card, and played an upgrade card in this round. So it's kind of like a more, I don't know whether it's kind of a nice version of Ploymaster or Geared for War. I mean, you have got to get an objective, but you only have to play 1 ploy and 1 upgrade. So I think those bits are more more easy to score than Ploymaster or Geared for War. And with the objective card, you probably will score 1 in a turn. You hope so anyway. And it's in this round, so you can, if you score another 1 at the end of the phase, you can still score this one. So that's Master of War I put in there instead of Hoarders, just a last minute switch out. So my ploys then, I've gone for some standard ploys that aren't from the new deck. This is a 22 card power deck, so I've gone for Jewel of Wits and Confusion, Illusory Fighter, because I want to be able to get a bit of extra mobility hopefully on the Fire Slayer. Certainly want to try and nip them into the opponent's area if I can at the end, so that might be useful. Shifty Shaft to help manipulate the objectives towards me, very important. There's quite a lot of this deck is around moving the objectives around, trying to keep on them at the end of the turn. I can see there being a scrabble at the end of the turn for objectives. Sprint, pretty much for the same reason. You can charge onto an objective that people aren't expecting it at the end of a turn, or possibly sprint into my opponent's half at the end. And the Earth Shakes, choose a fighter and push them 1 hex. I like that one. That's not specific to either your warband or the enemies, so that's quite a good one to have. Tantalising Prize, first friendly fighter to make a action in the next activation can move up to an additional 2 hexes if they move onto an objective. So this kind of all is steered towards getting on those objectives and, you know, ideally reaching those ones in my opponent's half. Urgold Boon is effectively a healing potion for Duardin or Fire Slayer, so I've put that in here. I haven't got a healing potion, but I've got that one instead. Ready for action. Play this action after you upgrade a fighter in the action phase. They can make a move or attack action. How powerful is that? It's a general card, and I think that's going to be a staple in many a deck in future months and years. Treasure Lust. Choose a friendly fighter and push them up to 3 hexes. They must end up holding an objective. Again, it's effectively a free move at the end of your turn. Time that right, and it could be very potent indeed. Earthquake. Push all fighters 1 hex. You must push them all in the same direction. They cannot be pushed. Any that cannot be pushed are not pushed. Earthquake. I almost left it out. I included it in the end just so we could see it in action. It is really only useful, I think, or mostly useful as a counter to somebody else who has Earthquake for Duardin. I think, but it is brilliant for people who are, if you're going playing against objective holders and you can push them off. I think you almost have to have it in, because if somebody pushes you off your objectives, you can push them back on again in theory, and have Earthquake battles. But Earthquake is in for the moment, and so they are the ploys. And I think before I move on to the objectives, before I move on to the upgrades, I think Fire Slayers are the ones I had the most trouble with. I don't know whether it's because they're the new cards, but I found that they feel like they really live or die by what ploys and upgrades come out. And there's lots you could choose. I found it really difficult to trim this deck down. But here are my objectives. So I've got some standard ones. I've got my Shadegrass Darts, which I like for manipulation, knocking people off things. I've got great strength, handy for the Duardin, great fortitude, Grimnir speed, +2 move. I thought that was worth having again for being nippy around the board as much as you can. Awakened weapon, you can re-roll 1 attack dice each time this fighter makes an attack action. Sprinter, +1 move, so it's just a +1 move card. Grimnir's fortitude is +1 defense for Grimnir. Light-footed, during an attack action that could drive this fighter back, whether or not your opponent chooses to, you can push them 1 hex instead. I quite like this for, you know, when you're trying to defend your objectives. I think that's worth having on there. Vampiric weapon, when this fighter takes an enemy fighter out of action, remove 1 wound token from this fighter. Quite like the look of that. Would be pretty tasty in conjunction with demonic weapon, maybe. Activated runes. Each time this fighter makes an attack, you can re-roll 1 dice. Very handy thing to have. And headlong charge. When this fighter makes a charge action, increase their move characteristic by 1 until the end of the activation. I think that's good. I put it in there again for speed, getting around the board, charging extra movement, getting into your opponent's area, just getting away from the central zone. I think that's worth having. So that's why that's in there. So that's my deck. I'll see how it fares against the Aurochs. I'm sort of torn between that because I'm going to be playing my Grand Clash, or Pete's going to be playing my Grand Clash deck, as I said. And in some ways I want that Aurochs to annihilate them. In other ways I want these cards to win. So we have to wait and see what happens. So they are my first ever Fire Slayers deck. I hope you found that useful, and until next time, goodbye.